Hey there, ready to get a little deeper. Today, we're tackling something that's surprisingly relevant to everyone, even if you don't always think about it: social connection, or the lack of it. And let me tell you, this isn't just about feeling a bit lonely sometimes. It goes way beyond that.
It really does. It's fascinating how much we tend to underestimate the impact of social connection on our lives.
So, the reason we're diving into this today is because you sent us a pretty impactful source: the U.S. Surgeon General's 2023 advisory report, our epidemic of loneliness and isolation. It's not light reading, that's for sure, but it pulls insights from all kinds of fields, from psychology to economics. What we're aiming for today is to figure out exactly how this whole social connection thing, or lack thereof, is affecting your health, your well being, and even the communities around you. And just as important, what you can actually do about it.
What's striking about this report is how it highlights that social connection is as essential to us as humans as the basics.
Mm.
Food, water, shelter. We just don't always think about it that way.
Yeah, that really grabbed my attention too, especially when the report drops this statistic. About 1 in 2 adults in America reported experiencing loneliness. And that was even before the whole COVID-19 pandemic shook things up. I mean, imagine that just feeling lonely can be as harmful to your health as lighting up 15 cigarettes every day.
It's a stark comparison, but it really underscores the seriousness of the issue. Loneliness isn't just a personal struggle. It's a full-blown public health crisis. And as you pointed out, it's probably gotten even worse after the pandemic forced so many of us into isolation.
Okay, so we've established that loneliness is a big deal. But I think where things get really interesting is that the report goes beyond just saying, oh, you need more friends. It dives into what actually makes for a truly fulfilling connection.
You're right, it's much more nuanced than that. The report breaks down social connection into three key parts: structure, function, and quality.
All right, let's break that down. What exactly does that mean for, someone listening right now trying to figure out their own connections?
Well, structure is about the size and diversity of your social circle. Think of it like this. It's not just about how many people you know. It's also about the kinds of relationships you have: family, close friends, colleagues. Even those acquaintances you bump into at your favorite coffee shop, they all contribute to a diverse social network.
So, someone who mostly just interacts with coworkers might be missing out on some of the benefits of a more diverse network. Like,
Yeah.
I know for me, volunteering at the animal shelter not only connects me with other animal lovers, but also gives me a totally different set of interactions than my work life does.
That's a great example of how different relationships provide different types of support,
Mm.
which is where function comes in. Think about the roles these relationships play in your life. Do they offer emotional support when you're down? Companionship for fun activities? Do they challenge you to grow and learn? A strong network gives you a variety of those things.
Right. It's like having a toolbox full of different tools. You need the right one for the right job. And then there's quality, which I'm guessing is about whether those connections actually feel good and supportive.
Exactly. It doesn't matter how many friends you have on social media if those relationships are filled with drama or negativity.
Hmm.
The report really emphasizes that it's the quality of those connections that truly matters. Are they healthy? Do they bring you joy? Do they make you feel seen and understood?
So it's not just about being surrounded by people, it's about having those deep, genuine relationships that make you feel truly connected. But hold on, if social connection is so important, why are we hearing so much about loneliness and isolation these days?
That's a great question, and it leads us to some pretty concerning trends that the report highlights. It seems like we might be getting less connected as a society, and it's been happening for a while.
Okay, so if we look around, what kind of red flags are popping up?
Well, for starters, the reports found that Americans are spending more time alone these days. And the most significant drop in face-to-face time with friends is happening among young adults. It makes you wonder if all the technology we're surrounded by, while great for some things, might be playing a role in that shift.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because technology can connect us in some ways, but it's also changing how we interact. And are there other signs of this decline in connection?
Oh, absolutely. Beyond just spending more time alone, people are also reporting having fewer close friends than in the past.
Mm.
And it's not just friends. Think about family size, marriage rates, and even involvement in community organizations. All of these have been shrinking for decades.
Yeah.
It's like the traditional ways we used to connect are slowly fading away.
And on top of that, there's the whole decline in trust. I mean, the report says that trust in each other and in institutions is at near historic lows. It's almost like the fabric of society itself is fraying a bit, you know?
It's a powerful image, and it really speaks to the complexity of this issue. It's not just about individual choices. There are larger societal forces at play here.
So if you're listening right now, think about how these trends might be showing up in your own life. Have you noticed any changes in your social interactions over the years? Do you feel as connected as you used to? This isn't just abstract data. It's about understanding how these shifts might be impacting each of us personally.
It's a good point to pause and reflect, because as we'll see, the consequences of this disconnection go far beyond just feeling a little lonely sometimes.
And that actually brings us to a really helpful framework the report uses to explain all of this, the social ecological model. It's kind of a mouthful, but it basically helps us see how social connection is influenced by lots of different factors, not just individual choices.
You're right, it's a great way to visualize how this all works. Think of it like a set of nested circles. You're at the center. Then there's your immediate circle of relationships, family, friends, partners. Then that circle expands outward to your community, and finally to the larger society. The report says each of these layers can affect how connected you feel.
So it's not just about whether you put yourself out there, it's also about the environment you're in and the larger forces at play.
Exactly. At the individual level, things like your health, your economic situation, even your personality can play a role. Someone struggling with a chronic illness might have less energy for socializing, or someone dealing with financial stress might have to work multiple jobs, leaving less time for connecting with others.
That makes total sense. It's like, you might want to connect, but sometimes life throws up these roadblocks.
Then there's the relationship level, which is all about the quality of those interactions. Are your relationships with family, friends, and coworkers generally supportive and fulfilling? Or are they filled with conflict or negativity?
And then as those circles expand, we've got the community level. I'm guessing this is about things like where you live and what resources are available.
You got it. Think about whether you have access to things like parks and green spaces, community centers, or even just reliable public transportation. These things can influence how easy it is to get out and connect with others. And if those things aren't readily available, it can make building those connections more challenging.
It's amazing how all these pieces fit together. And then we have the outermost circle, the societal level.
Right. This is where we see the influence of larger factors like public policies, cultural norms, and economic conditions. Think about things like how technology is being used, attitudes towards social issues, or even just the overall economic climate. All of these things can have a trickle-down effect on our individual and community experiences.
So if we're trying to understand our own level of social connection, or maybe why we're feeling disconnected, it's important to look at all these different layers and see how they're playing out in our lives.
That's a great takeaway. It's about recognizing that social connection isn't just a personal responsibility. It's also shaped by the environments we live in and the systems we're a part of.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about why social connection matters, how the report defines it, and some of the concerning trends that suggest we might be becoming more disconnected.
And we've also explored how this social ecological model helps us understand the various factors that influence our ability to connect with others.
Exactly. But now I'm curious, are there certain groups of people who are more vulnerable to experiencing this kind of disconnection?
That's a really important question, and it's a place where we need to be sensitive and thoughtful. It's not about labeling anyone or making assumptions, but it is helpful to look at the research and see if any patterns emerge.
So, are there certain circumstances or life situations that might make someone more susceptible to feeling lonely or isolated?
The report points to a few groups that seem to be particularly vulnerable, and it's not always who you might expect.
Okay, so who are we talking about here?
Well, for starters, people struggling with poor physical or mental health often face more challenges when it comes to staying connected. Think about it. If you're dealing with a chronic illness or mental health challenges, it can take a lot of energy just to get through the day, let alone nurture relationships.
That makes a lot of sense. And I imagine things like disabilities or financial insecurity can also make it harder to participate in social activities or even just afford the costs of going out.
You're absolutely right. Those factors can create real barriers to connection. And then there are people who might be more isolated simply due to their living situation, like those who live alone or single parents who are juggling a lot of responsibilities. It can be tough to find the time and energy for socializing when you're constantly on the go.
I hear that. And what about age? Isn't loneliness supposed to be a bigger problem for older adults?
That's a common assumption. And while it's true that social isolation is more prevalent among seniors, the report actually found something pretty surprising. Young adults are almost twice as likely to report feeling lonely compared to those over 65.
Wow, that's not what I was expecting. I guess I always pictured loneliness as something that affected people later in life.
It's a good reminder that loneliness can impact anyone at any age. And what's particularly concerning is that the rate of loneliness among young adults has been steadily rising for decades.
It makes you wonder if some of the pressures young people are facing today, like the constant comparison and pressure to present a perfect image on social media, might be playing a role in that.
That's certainly one possibility, and it brings us to a really interesting and complex topic, the role of technology in all of this.
Right, because technology gets blamed for a lot of things these days.
Mm.
But it also allows us to stay connected in ways that were never possible before. So how do we make sense of this double-edged sword?
The report acknowledges both the benefits and the drawbacks of technology when it comes to social connection. On the positive side, it can be a lifeline for people who might otherwise feel isolated. Think about online support groups for people with chronic illnesses or virtual communities built around shared interests. Those can be incredibly valuable resources for connecting with others.
I can definitely see that. And even just being able to stay in touch with family and friends who live far away, that's something we often take for granted now.
Exactly. But as with most things in life, there needs to be a balance. The report also points to some potential downsides of technology,
Hmm.
especially when it comes to excessive social media use.
Right, because we've all heard about how too much social media can lead to increased loneliness, not to mention the potential for cyberbullying and those unhealthy comparisons we were just talking about.
Exactly. It's not about demonizing technology, but rather using it mindfully and making sure our online interactions don't come at the expense of real-world connections.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, using technology to enhance our connections, but not letting it replace those face-to-face interactions that are so crucial for our well-being.
And this actually brings us to another fascinating concept the report delves into, the idea of vicious and virtuous cycles when it comes to social connection.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly are we talking about here?
The report explains how certain factors, like our health or economic status, can create these feedback loops. They can either reinforce or break down social connection.
So it's like a domino effect where one thing leads to another, either for better or for worse.
Precisely. Let's take health as an example. If you're struggling with poor health, it can be harder to get out and socialize, which can lead to feelings of loneliness and isolation. And the irony is that isolation can then make your health even worse, creating this downward spiral.
That's a tough cycle to break out of, and I imagine financial insecurity could work in a similar way.
Absolutely. If you're constantly stressed about money, you might have to work longer hours or multiple jobs, leaving you with less time and energy for social activities. This can lead to a sense of isolation, which can then make it even harder to find opportunities to improve your financial situation.
It's like these challenges compound on each other, making it harder and harder to get ahead. But I'm hoping there are also positive cycles at play here.
Thankfully, there are. The report also highlights how positive experiences and behaviors can create upward spirals of connection. One example is volunteering. When you volunteer, you're not only helping others, you're also creating opportunities to connect with people who share your passions and values. This can boost your sense of purpose and belonging, which can then lead to even more involvement in your community, creating this beautiful ripple effect.
So it's like the more you give, the more you get back, both in terms of personal fulfillment and stronger connections with others.
And this applies to workplaces as well. Companies that create supportive and inclusive work environments, where employees feel valued and connected to their colleagues, tend to see higher levels of job satisfaction, creativity, and productivity.
It makes sense that when people feel good about where they work and who they work with, they're going to be more engaged and do better work. It's a win-win for everyone involved.
And it's a powerful reminder that we have the power to disrupt those negative cycles and create positive ones. By prioritizing social connection in our lives, we can create these ripple effects that improve not only our own well-being, but also the well-being of those around us.
Okay, so we've talked about how social connection can create these powerful feedback loops, both positive and negative. But now I want to get into the science of it all. The report is packed with evidence linking social connection to specific health outcomes, and some of it is pretty mind-blowing.
It really is. The research on this is incredibly compelling, and it shows just how deeply intertwined our social lives are with our physical and mental health.
So let's start with the big one. How does social connection actually impact our lifespan?
Well, buckle up, because this is a big one. Studies have shown that individuals with strong social ties have a 50% higher chance of survival compared to those who are more isolated.
Hold on, 50%. That's enormous. Are you saying that simply having strong connections could add years to our lives?
The evidence certainly suggests that's a possibility, and the benefits extend far beyond just longevity. Strong social connections have also been linked to a reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, and even hypertension.
So nurturing our relationships could literally be good for our
It's
hearts.
not just a metaphor, it's backed by scientific evidence. And it doesn't stop there. The report also highlights how social connection can play a role in managing chronic conditions like diabetes.
That makes sense. I imagine having a supportive network makes it easier to stick to healthy habits and navigate the challenges of managing a chronic illness.
That's certainly part of it. But the benefits go even deeper than that. Social connection has also been linked to a stronger immune response. Studies have shown that people with robust social ties are less likely to get sick, and they even show better responses to vaccines, including the COVID-19 vaccine.
So it's like social connection is giving our immune systems a boost. What other benefits are we talking about?
Well, this one might surprise you, but social connection has also been linked to better cognitive function and a reduced risk of cognitive decline and dementia later in life.
Yeah, it's amazing. So staying connected could actually help protect our brains as we age.
The research is very promising in that regard. And of course, we can't forget the profound impact of social connection on our mental health. The report cites numerous studies linking strong social ties to a lower risk of depression, anxiety, suicide, and self-harm.
That one isn't as surprising, but it's still so important to highlight. Feeling loved and supported can make a world of difference when it comes to coping with stress and difficult life events.
It's like having a buffer against the inevitable challenges that life throws our way. Social connection helps us build resilience and weather those storms.
Okay, so we've established that social connection is good for our hearts, our immune systems, our brains, and our mental well-being. But now I'm really curious. How does it actually work? What's the science behind all these benefits?
That's where things get really fascinating. The report delves into several different mechanisms that help explain how social connection impacts our bodies and minds. On a biological level, it's been shown to influence our stress hormones, reduce inflammation, and even affect gene expression.
It's like our bodies are literally wired to thrive in connection with others.
It certainly seems that way. And then there's the psychological impact. Social connection fosters a sense of meaning and purpose in life, which can boost our resilience and provide a sense of safety and belonging.
And I'm guessing those feelings then lead to healthier behaviors, creating that positive feedback loop we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. When we feel connected and supported, we're more likely to take care of ourselves physically and emotionally.
And the report also talks about how social connection can influence our behavior in more direct ways, right?
Yes, it can have a real impact on our lifestyle choices. For example, people with strong social ties tend to exercise more, eat healthier diets, and get enough sleep. They're also more likely to adhere to medical treatments and take medications as prescribed.
It's like having a built-in support system that's cheering you on and helping you stay on track with healthy habits.
And it's not just about direct support.
Hmm.
Social connections also shape our behavior by creating positive social norms. If everyone in your circle values healthy eating, for example, you're more likely to adopt those habits as well.
It's the power of collective behavior.
What-
We influence each other in ways we don't even realize.
And this brings us to another important point. The benefits of social connection extend far beyond our individual health.
Right, because we've been talking about how it's good for our bodies and minds, but it also has implications for things like education, the workplace, and even our communities as a whole, right?
That's exactly what the report emphasizes. It makes a compelling case for how social connection can create positive ripples that benefit society as a whole.
So let's explore that a bit. Starting with education. How does social connection play a role in student success?
Well, research has shown that students who have positive relationships with their peers, teachers, and families tend to do better academically. They're more engaged in school, have higher graduation rates, and are more likely to go on to higher education.
So it's not just about academics, it's about creating a supportive and connected school environment that sets kids up for success in all areas of their lives.
That's a great way to put it. And those benefits carry over into the workplace as well. The report highlights how workplaces that prioritize social connection see all sorts of positive outcomes.
Like what kind of outcomes?
Well, for starters, employees in those environments tend to report higher levels of job satisfaction. They're also more likely to be creative and productive, and they tend to stick around longer. reducing employee turnover.
It's about creating a culture where people feel valued, supported, and connected to their colleagues and their work.
Exactly. And those benefits aren't just good for morale, they also translate into tangible economic benefits for companies.
I can see how having happier and more engaged employees would lead to a more innovative and productive work environment. It's a win-win all around.
And beyond individual companies, social connection also plays a role in economic mobility on a larger scale.
I'm curious, what does that look like?
The report cites research suggesting that people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who have diverse social networks, including connections with people from higher socioeconomic backgrounds, are more likely to experience upward economic mobility.
So bridging those socioeconomic divides through social connection could actually create opportunities for people to move up the economic ladder.
That's the idea. And these benefits extend to entire communities. Communities with strong social connections tend to have lower crime rates, greater economic prosperity, and stronger civic engagement.
So it's not just about individual well-being, it's about creating thriving and resilient communities where everyone benefits.
That's one of the most powerful takeaways from the report. It's a call to action for all of us to recognize the incredible potential of social connection and to prioritize it in our lives, our communities, and our policies.
But before we get too carried away with all the positive aspects of social connection, I think it's important to acknowledge that it can have a dark side as well.
You're absolutely right. We need to be honest about the fact that our desire for connection, while fundamentally good, can sometimes lead us down unhealthy paths.
Okay, so I'm a little confused. How can something as beneficial as social connection actually be harmful?
Well, think about it this way. Our need to belong is so deeply ingrained in us that we'll sometimes seek it out in any way we can, even if it means joining groups or aligning ourselves with ideologies that are ultimately harmful to ourselves or others.
So, like joining a gang or an extremist group for a sense of belonging.
That's a stark example,
Mhm.
but it illustrates the point. These groups often prey on people who are feeling marginalized or disconnected from mainstream society, offering them a sense of identity and purpose that they may be lacking elsewhere.
It's like a twisted version of connection, where the desire to belong overrides critical thinking and moral judgment. It's a good point. I guess we often think of connection as being inherently positive, but it really depends on the context and the nature of those connections.
And that actually brings us to another concerning aspect of this, that the report touches on the role of social connection in societal polarization.
Okay, so how does that fit into all of this?
Well, we humans have this natural tendency to gravitate toward people who are like us, people who share our values, beliefs, and backgrounds. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing in itself, it can become problematic when it leads to echo chambers and a lack of exposure to different perspectives.
Right, because if we're only ever interacting with people who agree with us, it can reinforce our existing biases and make it harder to understand or empathize with those who hold different views.
That's exactly it. The report calls this the shrinking and homogenizing of our social networks. And the problem is, when we only ever interact with people who agree with us, it becomes much harder to understand and empathize with those who hold different perspectives.
It's almost like we're retreating into our own little tribes, and the common ground between those tribes keeps shrinking.
And that can have some pretty serious consequences for society as a whole. It makes it much harder to address complex challenges, find common ground on important issues, or even just have civil conversations with people who disagree with us.
It's like we're losing the ability to engage in healthy debate and dialogue, which are so essential for a functioning democracy.
The report really emphasizes that point, that a healthy democracy depends on citizens being able to engage with diverse viewpoints and find common ground even when they disagree. And that becomes much harder when we're all retreating into our own echo chambers.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. It's making me think about my own social circles and whether I'm actively seeking out diverse perspectives or just surrounding myself with people who already think like me.
It's a good question for all of us to ask ourselves.
Hmm.
And the report suggests that one of the most important things we can do to counteract this trend is to be more intentional about building bridges across those divides.
So how do we actually do that? How do we reach out to people who hold different views, especially when it feels like the world is so polarized these days?
Well, it starts with a willingness to listen, to really hear and understand where the other person is coming from, even if you don't agree with them.
It's about approaching those conversations with curiosity and empathy, rather than judgment or a need to be right.
Exactly. And it's also about remembering that even when we have strong disagreements, we can still connect on a human level. We all have shared experiences, hopes, and fears, and those commonalities can be a powerful starting point for building bridges.
It's a good reminder that we're all in this together, even when it doesn't feel like it.
And that brings us to the heart of the Surgeon General's message, a call for a national strategy to address social disconnection and foster a more connected society.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem, but now let's dive into the solutions. What does this national strategy look like?
The report outlines a comprehensive approach based on 6 key pillars. The first pillar focuses on strengthening what they call social infrastructure in local communities.
What exactly does that mean? Are we talking about building more community centers or something?
It's more than just physical buildings, although those can certainly be a part of it. It's about investing in the programs, policies, and spaces that bring people together and create opportunities for connection. Think about things like community gardens, libraries, parks, after-school programs, and even reliable public transportation.
It's about creating environments where people can easily get out and connect with their neighbors, right?
Exactly. It's about making connection more accessible and ingrained in the fabric of our communities. The second pillar calls for enacting pro-connection public policies.
So this is where we start looking beyond individual actions and thinking about how our systems and institutions can support connection.
Precisely. This could involve policies like paid family leave, which allows parents to bond with their newborns and build strong family foundations, or affordable housing policies that prevent displacement and keep communities intact.
So it's acknowledging that social connection isn't just a personal responsibility, it's also shaped by the policies and systems that govern our lives.
The third pillar focuses on mobilizing the health sector to address social connection.
So this is where we start recognizing the very real health implications of social connection and treating it as a vital part of overall well-being.
Exactly. The report calls for training healthcare providers to screen patients for loneliness and social isolation, just like they would screen for other health risks. It also encourages healthcare systems to connect patients with community resources that can support their social needs.
It's almost like treating social connection as a vital sign, right? Like checking in on your social health just as you would check your blood pressure or cholesterol.
That's a great analogy. And the fourth pillar tackles a big one that we've already touched on, the digital environment.
This is where we have to grapple with the double-edged sword of technology and figure out how to harness its power for connection while mitigating the potential harms.
The report emphasizes the need for strategies that promote responsible and mindful technology use, as well as policies that protect us from the potential downsides, like online harassment and addiction.
So this could involve things like setting limits on screen time, promoting digital literacy skills, and maybe even designing social media platforms in ways that encourage healthier interactions.
Those are all great examples. And then we have the fifth pillar, which is all about deepening our knowledge of social connection.
I'm guessing this is where research comes in.
Exactly. The report calls for more research to better understand the complex interplay of factors that influence social connection, the effectiveness of different interventions, and the long-term impacts of technology on our relationships.
So it's about building a solid evidence base to inform our policies and practices. And what about the sixth pillar?
The sixth pillar is all about cultivating a culture of connection. This is where we move beyond structures and systems and start looking at how we can shift our values and behaviors as a society.
So this is about changing our mindsets and our habits to prioritize connection in our daily lives.
It's about promoting kindness, empathy, and respect in our interactions with others. It's about making time for face-to-face interactions and creating opportunities for meaningful connections in our communities.
So it's not just about grand gestures, it's about those small, everyday actions that strengthen our bonds with others.
That's a great way to put it. And this pillar really highlights the fact that building a more connected society is a collective effort. It requires individuals, communities, institutions, and policymakers all working together toward a common goal.
Well, this deep dive has been incredibly insightful. We've uncovered that social connection, or the lack of it, has a profound impact on our health, well-being, and even our communities.
Absolutely. It's clear that we can't afford to ignore this issue any longer. The Surgeon General's report is a call to action for all of us.
It's a reminder that we're not meant to go through life alone. We all need connection to thrive. And the good news is we have the power to create a more connected world.
I encourage everyone listening to explore the 6 pillars and the specific recommendations laid out in the report. See which ones resonate with you and consider what actions you can take in your own life.
If we all prioritize connection Imagine the ripple effect it could have on our lives, our communities, and even the world. What role will you play in building a more connected future?